I now call this meeting of the RPS 205 Board of Education Committee of the Whole to order at 5:31 p.m. Please call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Present.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch? Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Very good. I'd like to recognize, I believe Connor is our host for tonight's meeting, so if anything goes wrong, we know who to blame, right? Yeah, but thank you, Connor, for hosting and making sure everything's working. Just a reminder to all board members that to hold your questions until after the presentations are done. The first order of business is, are there any changes, corrections, or additions to the meeting minutes of April 7th? I know that is the Mr. Dixon's name is typo in the roll call for that meeting. The X is missing in Dixon. So, okay, so that's the only correction that I saw. Anybody else have any corrections? All right, is there a consensus to approve? Just give me a thumbs up if you're a board member. All right, very good. All right, thank you. Those are approved. We'll now move on to our new business, and Mrs. Detman is going to go first about Board Policy 6.300, Instruction Graduation Requirements. Mrs. Detman, take it away. You are muted still, Heidi. Okay.
All you missed was me saying I want to share my screen.
Okay.
So if I could do that, please, Connor. Thank you. And we'll go ahead and get started. And I have to guys in advance. Committee of the Whole is much night than board, and so my children are more active. So hopefully you don't hear too much background noise behind me. Oops. Okay, so this is a relatively straightforward. We okay?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, this is a relatively straightforward provision or adjustment to our current policy, and it was derived after reading the state guidance that came out just last week, last Monday, which allows us to temporarily reduce our graduation requirements to make sure that we are continually in line with the hold harmless approach during this emergency closure. So again, this is in response to Executive Order 2020-31 and the emergency rules. And that gives us local control under the state guidance to take a look at policy 6.300 and make sure that we are continuing to have the hold harmless approach and using our decision making through the lens of equity. And just as a reminder, this is effective only for students who are scheduled to graduate in the spring of 2020. So in other words, students who were already enrolled in classes to meet their graduation requirements in the spring of 2020. Essentially, the concept is very simple. We reduce basically a semester's worth of credits from the total graduation requirements. So what that means is it takes us from 48 down to 40. And on the next slide, I provided the detail of what that looks like for you. So you can see there's essentially one reduction across the board in all core content areas, but also the requirement for health is waived and for physical education as well. Electives, our current language says bring the total to 48, and in the revision, our elective credits bring the total graduation to 40. There's also a portion of the guidance that allows for the waiver of state assessment requirements. There are some seniors who did not take an SAT their junior year for a variety of reasons. They generally are very unique circumstances. So this allows us to exempt those students from that requirement in order to graduate on time. And then also same thing for the Constitution test and their government course. However, we did not go with the lowest threshold that the state provided guidance on because we have always maintained an additional year of social science and science in our local requirements. So we did not reduce a year and a half, we only reduced a half year in those areas. And so overall, we are still above the state minimum threshold for graduation requirements, and we maintained that standard. There is a consideration for college-bound students. There are a lot of words on this slide, but what's essential is underlined, and that is that with the school counselors, we want to make sure that we're advising students to reach out to their post-secondary institutions if they come in below their general threshold of 48, to be sure that they still match the requirements for their post-secondary institution, because that's up to each individual institution. So we want to make sure we give that advice. Essentially, this recommendation from the administration is in alignment with our global pandemic priority, which is do no harm to students. Students have been planning and preparing, some of them for years, for moving on from secondary to post-secondary, whatever that might look like. And we want to make sure that this global pandemic doesn't stand in their way from taking their next step. And that's the end of the presentation. It's very simple. It's basically just an acknowledgement that it was a really hard semester for our 12th grade students. We want to ensure that they're able to move on in their post-secondary endeavors. And I'll take any questions that you might have.
Okay, if any board member has a question, please identify yourself by your name, and then I'll call on you.
Hi, Connor.
Mr. Connor.
Yeah, so in terms of the Constitution test, what percentage of students is it that have not taken it?
I have that exact number. Generally, by the time we reach the spring semester of their senior year, the number is not.
Okay. And for those things where it's not required, essentially, is there any makeup on that, or do we just let them graduate and then there's no follow-up?
Correct. We would not make them back into the exam after they've graduated. It's only for students for this year.
All right. I would think, that there would be something that goes going on in the college. There's somebody who is not muted because
Yeah. Could I ask everybody to mute?
Yeah.
Except for Mike. Is that better? Okay.
Yes.
That's better.
Yeah. So I'm just speaking for myself. It just seems odd that something like the Constitution test wouldn't be required, but I mean, that's been around forever.
It's important to remember, however, that all students have taken U.S. history their junior year. They've also had American history and U.S. history in their middle school experience. And if they've had government and econ their senior year, they've had the content. This is just simply that last test. Most students have already attempted it at least once this school year. If they had government first semester, they've attempted it and passed it and moved on. So this is a relatively small number of students. I don't have the exact percentage, but it doesn't waive their U.S. history content. They took that their junior year.
Yeah. Okay, as a follow-up, it would be nice, and I recognize it's water over the bridge, but I'd at least like to know how many, percentage.
Sure, we keep pretty good records of that, and I can provide that for you.
I'm channeling my late father, by the way, who was a social studies teacher, and that was one of the rites of passage was the Constitution test. So
Understand.
It is, and we generally offer multiple opportunities for students, and we make sure we get every student over that line.
Other board member comments or questions? I don't hear anyone, but Heidi, I actually had one on the the slide that has the consideration for college-bound students and the underlying section that says determine if any flexibility is being offered. I guess my question would be, what if it isn't being offered, and what does the student do then?
So I've already given our high school counselors kind of a heads up that this language is coming, and they need to be closely examining their caseloads for any students that might be in that 40 to 48 gap, so that they can be in close contact with their post-secondary institutions. Seniors still have from now until the end of the school year to be sure that they have made all efforts to take any grade that's below passing up to passing to make sure they meet that requirement. The most important thing for them right now is to be informed, so they know what the consequences are if they don't engage.
Very good. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, this will return for a vote at our board meeting on May 12th. So Mrs. Yar is presenting our next item, which is the budget resolution for 2021. Take it away, Michelle.
Okay, thank you. I'll just need to share my screen also.
Oh, it's starting.
You see it now?
There it is, yep.
Okay, wonderful. So I presented this already during the tentative budget. So I thought I would just hit the highlights tonight and then the changes. This is certainly a work in process. This, again, is taking you through our process and how we finalize the budget. We're getting very close to a final product, but there's still opportunities to make changes at this point. The one thing that had changed, we talked about the not evidence-based funding, but the CARES Act last time. I hadn't included that. So now that we have more information about the CARES Act, although we don't have a lot of specifics, we do know that it's not to replace revenue. So I think that's an important point to make. So it's basically to reimburse the expenditures that we have incurred because of COVID-19. So we're keeping really great records on that, and we anticipate getting 7.6. So it's not going to come in this year. I don't really think it's going to come in because the state has to apply for it yet, and we're in May. So I really think it's going to hit next year. CBPRT, corporate personal property replacement tax. I'm just bringing this forward only because we changed that to reflect the 25% reduction. We did have that at $20 million, and now I took it down about $1 million to be exactly the 25% at $19 million. So that's been a change since you've seen it last. Operating funds, I didn't really like how I was communicating this in the past when I did a second look at this. What was happening is if you looked at one slide, let's say you looked at the revenue or the expenditures in isolation, you would think that our budget was $462 million because health insurance was included. And it gets into the fund accounting, and it's a health insurance fund, so I've excluded that. So the money going out the door is $411 million, and we're balanced on the revenue side and the expenditure side, and that's what you're seeing now is the expenditure side. So I just noted that because it's a change from what we've done the last couple of years, but I think it's a better look at it, basically. And here you'll see the tentative budget summary, and this is by fund. So it's just all the details of what you saw in the previous slides. We not only have to budget basically, overall for the operating, but we also have to budget for the other funds and non-operating funds. So the internal service fund, I moved over to the non-operating funds. These are the funds that we can't use for another purpose. So they're restricted in nature. They can only use for health insurance fund, debt service only for that reason, capital funds the same way. So we have those in those buckets. To make it cleaner, I have written out, and you'll see a transfer coming forward next week for the transfer in and for the furniture plan. So you see that at 2.3 and 1.3, that's for that furniture plan commitment. We also can allocate, that's for interest. So we allocate interest that way. So that's what we've earned on our investments. We can also allocate corporate personal property replacement tax to any fund. So we needed to realign these revenues and expenditures to be in the right buckets, basically. So we've done that through some CBPRT allocation, and these are commitments that were done during the facilities master plan that came to light recently. So we were making, again, the revenues and expenditures align nicely, and we've been working on aligning these funds for a couple of years. We're doing this also, you can see in the tax levy, when I'm looking at the funds, really aligning those where we don't have to play like shell game necessarily, like it used to be in the past with transportation funds. So you can see this, I've also included the multi-year projections. You haven't seen this before, but we typically will include the multi-year projections. Of course, this year is really difficult. It's always difficult to do multi-year projections, but when you don't know what really 21 is going to look like, it makes it even more difficult. But this is our best guess at this time. Evidence-based funding, I use 6% going forward for fiscal year 22 and ongoing for this look. And this is because this is the lowest amount we've ever seen in an increase, even under general state aid. So I feel comfortable with that. The tax levy is flat. Corporate personal and property replacement tax, we went back to fiscal year 20 levels because we hope this is a blip of 1 year where we have a decrease in 1 year and then we go back, the economy starts back up, and then we get back to where we were as far as spending and corporations making money again at the levels that they were. And then the interest rate, we hope that that will come back and expect that to come back at least a 1% aggregate basis. So some things will be higher, some will be lower, but we should be able to get 1%. I don't know, I'm getting some alerts now. My email is turned off, so I don't know what's going on. Sorry about that. The fund balance projections, this is what I was alluding to, where you can see all the funds. I mean, they're not, here you can see in fiscal year 18, 17, where there was some funds that were like working cash fund, or not working cash, but operations and maintenance fund was below the line. So they were in the negative. So again, just working on trying to get all these funds aligned. In transportation, you can see it going down because we no longer have to levy so high in the transportation money or funds and then move it over with a transfer. We are able to do that in our education and our general fund. So that's what you're seeing here. And then the blue line is the 25% of expenditures. And so you can see that our fund balance, even with these assumptions that I'm using, we've maintained that 25% level that our policy states we need to maintain. This I thought was a good look at what could happen if these assumptions are wrong. I mean, these, we don't know what's happening. We areas are starting to plan reopening, but we're still in a very early stage of COVID. So what we have is the 6% evidence-based funding for fiscal year 21, and that's at flat. So that's 0 because that's what's built into our budget, and that's what you see. If it comes in flat, which some recommendation is to hold it flat, but we're tier 1, and I do not think that we're going to come in flat for evidence-based funding. If that were to happen, it's a $9 million swing. So then you would see it would go down $9 million. That is exactly what fund balance is to be used for an emergency. So we not only have an emergency with our health situation, the impact on our health, but also the economy at the exact same time. So that's a $9 million fund balance that we potentially could have to dip into, and we'd still be meeting our threshold if that were to occur. So reporting back, our next step is a public hearing. And again, this can still be updated throughout this time until we pass the budget. So we can continuously change it. What happens is we update it to our board internet, and then the public can see it. And you guys, everyone can see what we're updating. And I will definitely communicate if we have any updates, but what I'm seeing now is where I think it's going to stay unless we get some additional information between now and the approval on June 23rd. Any questions?
Okay, board members, if you have comments or questions, please state your name and I'll call on you.
Ken, this is Tim.
Mr. Rollins.
First, just a comment, and Michelle alluded to it. We've been pretty conservative about making sure we have an adequate fund balance, and this is why. So I just want to say that we are set to weather this, and if we're off in any one year on some of these projections, because really we can't, I don't think anybody can make any accurate projections about how any of the revenue is going to come out at this point. But we have the luxury, I guess, of having that fund balance to cushion us. The question I've got is budget related, but it's not strictly a budget question. I'm just curious, how is all of this impacting recruiting for next year? Are we able to recruit teachers for next year? Because we will have, we will have vacancies, and we haven't really talked about the recruiting aspect of it. How is that going?
I guess Mr. Zediker maybe might be the best person to answer that.
Yes. So right now we're still recruiting. We're doing everything virtually. A lot of back and forth with universities because student teachers were cut short. But the state has waived some of the criteria for those graduating seniors to be able to apply. So I think there was some uncertainty with some young teachers who were just finishing up with school. So with the state guidance and approval to waive some of the criteria with testing and the completion of student teaching, we're seeing those applicants come in. We certainly are being impacted. We had, job fairs and things that we had planned to attend like every other district. But I do know that the principals are actively interviewing. And I know our team, the recruitment team is doing Zooms and connecting with not only our student teachers, but any applicants from, the university fairs that we were able to get to prior to kind of the closure. I do think we're going to see an impact on both sides. With the uncertainty, I'm kind of predicting that we won't maybe see as many folks try to leave and take different jobs during this uncertain time. But then I also think that we will be impacted a little bit in terms of our ability with the number of recruits that we get.
Okay. I mean, it is what it is. I'm just hoping we don't start the year next year with a lot of vacancies, but we'll see.
Okay.
I didn't have any other questions on the budget.
Okay. Other board members?
Mike Connor.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah, on the CBPRT, do we have a sense of timing of like what lead time would the economy have to be back up to meet the assumptions that you've built in? So would it be, by the end of the year? I mean, what?
1 quarter. So we've already been down since March, basically. So it needs to start up here very quickly for us to meet what I have at the 25%.
Yeah, I mean, this is a comment, is I would be surprised if it turns around. I mean, we're getting pretty close to the middle of the second quarter on the regular calendar. So I would say third quarter might be the reasonable assumption for any return to partial, normality here.
Yeah, so with every month that goes out, I mean, you can start counting down. I mean, right now the economy was shut down in March. So it's May, so we'll continuously look at that. But with the phased approach, hopefully reopening, we'll just have to go in and wait and see. What could happen is we could kind of split the difference. Evidence-based funding may not be flat, but it may not be 6%. And then it would offset some of that CBPRT that may be affected. So it doesn't have to be in the exact bucket as far as the revenue goes, but I think between the two revenue sources that would offset one another.
All right. It would be nice. That's a good comment, and maybe just note that so that somebody looking at this would understand that those two accounts might offset each other.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Ms. Stanford?
Yeah, just one quick question. What is tort immunity?
Yes.
That's a lawyer question.
Oh,
that's a lawyer question.
It's a fund that's only to be used for specific purposes. Legal is one. It's for, it's really related to legal mainly. So we can have
Yes.
audit can be charged there. Lori's helping out with that.
You want me to help out?
Well, I saw yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so a tort is a wrongdoing that, and frequently you'll see it brought in a lawsuit for somebody who does something wrong, like hitting somebody else. That's an easy way to explain it. Or it could be a car accident, things like that. So as a public body, we are immune from suit except in the most egregious circumstances. The Tort Immunity Fund is used for insurance purposes. It's used to defend against potential lawsuits or prevent. So risk management primarily.
Thank you.
Okay, other board member comments or questions?
I do, Ken Jude.
Mrs. McCulloch.
I'm gonna piggyback on Tim's piece, and that was with our hiring, are we impacted at all by the immigration restrictions that are in place now? Because we typically are looking, in other countries for a lot of our bilingual support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's gonna that's impacting a little bit with Puerto Rico. We did do interviewing with with Spain. So we did already conduct interviews with some potential Spain. The good thing about that is with that cultural exchange visa, it's a different process because it is sponsored by ISBE. To say that there may not be any hiccups, I can't say that, but everything that we've gotten from our contact at ISBE, we are moving forward. And at this point right now, it looks like we're looking like we're going to have 4 teachers from Spain to help fill bilingual spots.
And how many do we usually have?
Somewhere between 3 and 5. So it's about par for the course.
Okay. Hopefully everything's in place and no last minute, how things go with our government. Hey,
Yes.
my other question is for Michelle, and could you re-explain, please? Transportation did used to kind of cover the gap, or it was like X-ray in the hospital. You got that, Ken, right? So
Yeah,
anyways, other departments kind of that bring in more revenue can then bleed over, but with fund accounting. Tell me what's happened, how we now don't have that issue with transportation, please. Explain it.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, the cap was lifted off of education fund. So now you can levy what you need to in education fund. Before there was a limit on there, and now in Fund 40, transportation was unlimited. So basically what districts did was they levy heavy there, and then you'd move them over later. So it was.
So now when we levy, we actually put them in the funds we want them to go into.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle, I have a question for you. This is Ken.
Sure.
Given the state of many people in Winnebago County being unemployed and not earning income, what happens if a percentage of taxpayers can't pay their property taxes and therefore are either can't pay them or they pay them late? Wouldn't that have a big effect on our revenues?
50% of the taxes are paid through escrow. Those have to come through and come to us. So we will have, we'll have that.
Okay.
We could have some revenue loss, but again, 50% is already, they've already come through escrow. We do recognize the revenue like half and half. So it's really a cash flow issue. And we are in good position for cash flow as well. We're really going to have to wait and see. We didn't want the county to not send out the tax bills, and from what I'm hearing right now, they plan on going out on time and coming and being due at the regular due date. So that was more of a cash flow issue last year when those went out late, you can recall. But now, it's really kind of soon to tell what kind of impact that's going to have for property taxes, because the bills haven't even gone out yet. But I did look at how much is escrowed.
Ken, if I could just jump in too. I mean,
Sure,
we do,
go ahead.
one benchmark for that. If you go back to the Great Recession, from an economic standpoint, at the depths of the Great Recession, it was similar to what we're seeing now. We really didn't see any impact on our real estate tax collections. I mean, the percentage of taxes collected did not vary much.
Interesting. Okay, any other board comments? All
The
right,
Great
anything else, Michelle?
Recession being 08, Tim? Are you
Yeah,
talking about-
2008.
Well, it didn't really. Rockford always gets hit a little later, with at least with traditional recessions. I don't know if that's true this time, but with traditional recessions, it always hits Rockford like 2 to 3 years after the rest of the country. So our economic activity really slid in Rockford in like 2010. So you really have to look at those numbers.
Okay.
Any other board member comments or questions for Michelle? Michelle, anything else from you?
No, I think that.
Okay,
covered it.
very good. So this, the budget resolution will come back for a vote on June 23rd at our board meeting, as Michelle had reported. I don't believe we have any other reports. And Laura, we do not have any public speakers.
We do not.
All right. So any other business for tonight?
I do have a suggested follow-up for Mr. Connor regarding constitution test data. So I believe this is
Okay.
follow up on that.
Okay, very good. So if there's no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board, I'll
Move
take a
to
motion. Motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 6:02.